Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. What was the
Serious.
most
What was the scariest, most bone-chilling thing you or someone you know has witnessed?
Please remember to like,
share, and subscribe. A friend of mine saw a girl throw herself in front of a subway train going full speed. He was on the other side of the platform, so instead of seeing her body getting run over, he stood there in shock, looking at the horrific aftermath. He had PTSD for the next 5 years, claiming he was seeing the girl's ghost walking behind him. One day I received a call. It was from his mother. He was hospitalized after having a very strong panic attack when one day, running in a park, he allegedly saw her corpse hanging from an overpass. I've never seen someone so emotionally destroyed. Normally being a calm, strong guy, he was sobbing like a baby when I entered the hospital room. This is pretty bad, but 3 years ago my brother committed suicide. His girlfriend broke up with him. Mind you, he was 18 and it was his first love. And the reason why she broke up with him was his best friend of 10 plus years. They also worked together at a pizza joint. He got into an argument with the kid and disappeared. Told all his friends he loved them and then wouldn't respond. Me and my boyfriend went looking for him and found him, hanging off of a tree stand in the middle of the woods not too far from my house. My boyfriend was the one who originally found him and tried to protect me from seeing it. But in that moment, I didn't want to believe. I wish I was allowed to push me back to that street. I'll never get that image out of my head of my handsome brother with no color, no emotion, and dead, cold to the touch. And sometimes it's the only image my brain will bring up when I think of him. I miss him a lot. It sucks. Lived and worked in New York City in 2012. I was standing on the platform waiting for the 6 train on 77th Street. There was a man who seemed to be running away from someone, and he hopped down into the tracks. He was trying to escape by climbing into another train across the platform when he slipped and fell between the cars. Immediately, the train took off to leave, and I saw his body get completely cut in half. For a moment, all I could hear was the complete evisceration of his torso. I had to go to therapy for months, and I refused to go to that station ever again. I worked as a front desk clerk at the overnight shift at a hotel. We had a regular guest, a local businessman with restaurants all over the area. He would rent a room for a weekend every couple of months and go on a bender. Usually got in Friday night and left Monday morning. One Monday, he hadn't checked out by the time he was supposed to. Went to check his room, no answer. Knocked 3 more times before I went in. He was dead on the floor. He had shit, pissed, and puked all over himself before slitting his wrist. The smell was horrendous. It's an image I've never been able to unsee. When I was about 10, I saw a motorcyclist clip a car and go under a truck going the opposite way. Saw him snap in two and a spray of blood as his spine punctured his leather clothing, and a half-broken helmet turned the wrong way looking directly at our car as we were stuck in traffic jam for about 2 hours as a result. All I remember was my dad screaming, "Don't look!" But it's hard to not look at the only thing happening outside your window. I don't feel truly scarred or anything, but I have seen bikers with a similar helmet and felt like I was about to die from an ungodly amount of dread. When I was 5, one of my friends got his fingers caught under the bumper of a car across the street. There were a bunch of kids hanging around the car, and people from the house came out drunk and got in the car, then drove off ignoring our screams. I still remember him running impossibly long steps to try and keep up with the car. Eventually, one of the men came running back, holding him, and I just remember the red, pink, and white of his knees as he had been dragged on asphalt. Ugh. When I was 11 and walking home from school in 6th grade, a car came up behind me and started rolling by really slowly. It went around the block and came right back behind me, creeping along. It was a beat-up old giant green Oldsmobile. This was 1992, being driven by a creepy, filthy man in his 40s that clearly didn't belong in my parents' nice neighborhood. I sped up. He sped up. When I turned a corner, he turned a corner. I realized that getting home was actually probably pretty unsafe, as I'd be home alone until my mom came home like 2 hours later. So I purposely turned another corner away from my house. He kept following me. I remember being so terrified, like my heart was going to pound out of my chest. I realized I was about 2 blocks from an acquaintance's house. She wasn't my friend really, but we'd done a couple of school projects together, and I knew her mom didn't work and would likely be home. So I took off running straight to her house. This guy followed me the entire way. turning again when I did, staying just behind me. He pulled up next to the house I went up to, just staring. When her mom answered the door, I am to this day thankful she was home. He apparently got spooked and took off. She called my mom and called the police. They came and, to their credit, took it very seriously. I remember feeling so stupid that I didn't get his license plate. Unfortunately, in the 5 minutes it took for the police to show up, he was just gone. I don't know if they pulled him over or anything, but I never did see him again. I was terrified to walk alone for years after that. I saw a covered body being pulled out of a house down the street. Apparently the guy had shot himself, and his mother and some friend had found his body. She was wailing so loudly, it seemed to go on forever, and time stopped. I witnessed the car crash and pulled over to help the people out of their car. My little cousins were in their car, and I told them to stay put and call an ambulance. They handled it very well, but the mother's screams for her baby will always stick with me. We got him out, but those couple moments when she didn't know where he was, this is why I have so much respect for first responders. Was driving one day at about 11 p.m., hit traffic, not unusual for the LA area even on a weeknight. Noticed just up the highway there was this orange light. As we inched closer, I realized it was a Jeep, overturned and in a blaze. No firefighters on the scene yet, no police. A couple of people had stopped and were on their phones, presumably calling 911. Seeing that car engulfed in flames was sobering, but the bone-chilling part was that I didn't see anybody standing around with any sort of visible injury. It looked like everybody standing and making phone calls were pedestrians who had stopped when they saw the wreck. So my immediate suspicion was that the driver was still inside, being burned down to ash. Watching my dog get put down. Let me set the scene for those who have never experienced this. I was 13 at the time, and my dog, who was my best friend, had been suffering from leukemia for months before me and my mom decided it was time. We brought her to the vet, and I wanted to stay in the room to be there for my dog to the very end. The vet took her away for a little bit to put a catheter in so that she could later inject the euthanasia. When she and my dog came back, it barely sunk in what I was about to see, and after a lot of crying, I told the vet I was ready. My dog was standing when the vet began to inject. I watched the whole time as my dog yelped, twitched, and immediately fell. She was gone before I could even blink. I didn't know it would be that fast, and I was so shocked. That moment replayed in my dreams for months, and I won't ever forget it. Probably not that bad. Was trying to see if there was an article to get a date, but couldn't find one. Anyway, I must have been around 9, and my parents took me to walk the dog, and it was really heavy snow, like Boxing Day, I think. We live in a really small village, and a woman had come home drunk Christmas Eve and couldn't find her keys to get back into the house, and in her drunk state, smashed one of the window panels to try and open the latch from the outside. The glass cut her wrist, and she bled to death slowly for hours in the snow. My parents didn't realize it hadn't been cleaned up yet, and when we walked past, I saw her bloodied handprints across the wall where she tried to hold herself up, and one final handprint that smudged down the wall where she eventually fell from blood loss. The most awful thing was the day before, on Christmas morning, when she was still laying there. My dad walked past with the dog at around 6 a.m. She was still alive, but it was pitch black, and he just didn't see her. When I was 10, my friend's dad drove a group of us to a park during the summer to play. When I got out of the car, I noticed the lady in the car next to us wearing a winter jacket and a scarf, but the car was running, and it looked like she was napping. About an hour later, we came back from one of the trails, and there was an ambulance, and they were carrying her out in a body bag. One evening, I was waiting on some friends to pick me up. They told me I should wait at the bus stop, and they'll be there in 5 minutes. I heard a screeching just a few minutes later, followed by a loud bang. Obviously, I rushed over to see what's happening, just to find out my friend's car flipped over and hit a tree when he came around a sharp corner a little too fast. He was unfamiliar with the area I lived in at the time. Probably not the scariest thing that happened to mankind, but my heart dropped out of my pants the second I recognized whose car it was. Luckily, he and his buddy who he was with both were uninjured, besides a few bruises and minor cuts from the glass. Many years ago, my mom was going over potential baby names for me with my 18-year-old uncle. She says, I kind of like Thomas. She said my uncle's face turned into a snarl, anything but Thomas, and then proceeded to tell her this tale. When he was 7 and visiting his grandparents' farm, he and the neighbor boy, Thomas, went to see the barn kittens. Thomas was older, and he simply walked up and started throwing the newborn kittens against the barn door. My uncle was horrified and frozen in place. He said Thomas was on kitten number 4 and cackling by the time he snapped to and fled. I was working as an MP one night, and we got a call about a baby crying in one of the apartments on base. We went out there and all the lights were on, but no one answered the door. We gained access to the apartment, and I found a 15 to 16-month-old with his arms duct taped to the crib. The mom wanted to go out and party that night. I could tell by looking at its arms this wasn't the first time. That kid's cries were terrible. It's horrible. When I was about 11 years old, I was up in my room alone at my desk working on some new Lego set I received for my birthday. Out of nowhere, a sock was just thrown from behind me and landed on top of the TV. It couldn't have fallen as there was no place for it to fall from, and the way it went past me, you could see it had clearly been thrown. And when I looked back, no one was there. I proceeded to run downstairs terrified. To be honest, it isn't nearly as creepy as some of the other stories posted here, but 11-year-old me was horrified. To this day, I have no explanation for who could have done it, considering the other 3 people in my house at the time were downstairs. My dad, back on some old times, mid-1900s, not sure exactly when. It's been a few years since he told me this. He and many of his friends got onto a train and were all going to somewhere in London or something for a massive drink fest. Would use the other way of saying it, but I'm unfamiliar with language rules here. One of his mates sticks his head out the window, and so does another from the other window. They talked for not even a minute when the one facing forwards pulled back inside a bit, but the other guy kept his head out enjoying the view. He didn't see the tunnel coming up. Blood everywhere. Not sure on the validity of this, but I asked other family and friends we know, and they backed the story. My mother, who was with a bunch of her friends, were stopped in the middle of the highway by a group of robbers. One of the bad guys pointed a gun at the driver while the other robbers demanded that they get out of the car. I think one of the robbers fired a warning shot so that they'll get off the SUV quickly. When all of them got out, they rounded them up in the middle of the road with the driver, and they asked them not to move and face backwards. Then they quickly got into the SUV and drove off using the vehicle as their getaway car. They were really lucky. Apparently, they killed a bunch of people, and it's just been 20 minutes since that incident when they hijacked their vehicle. I once watched a cable snap on a winch and lay a dude's chest from his pectoral all the way around his shoulder, which fractured his collarbone and went 1.5 feet down the left side of his back. Guy almost died from blood loss, but he still works in tree cutting. Got a really badass scar from it, though he's lucky it hit bone. Doctor said it had gone a few inches to the side, it would have cut the arteries in his neck and peeled the side of his head off. There's a bridge for a river where I grew up. My friend and I were crossing it and headed somewhere, laughing and having fun as usual together. And she looks over and stops in her tracks. I look over to see what made her look and stop like that. There was a guy. He looked to be just beyond middle age, gray-haired. He was trying something to the bridge, and I couldn't really tell what it was. My friend grabs me, and she said, "Come on, let's keep walking." Neither of us thought something serious of it. There were a lot of homeless in the area and a lot of people on drugs, so we just assumed it was something normal. Later, when we headed back to my place, headed toward crossing the bridge, a squadron of police cars and an ambulance raced by. When we got to the bridge, they were there doing something, saving someone. We got home, and my mom tells me that there was a man who hung himself on the bridge, the one right down the street. My friend and I looked at each other, her face drained of blood, probably same as mine. I immediately got dizzy because it was 100% the man we saw doing something, tying something. We could have done something, gotten him help, if only we weren't like 12 and naive. I could have saved that man's life. That was 8 years ago. Every time I pass that goddamn bridge, I think about that man. I regret not helping, not realizing what was going on.